It's strange, the things you remember when your world collapses. The scent of her expensive perfume, Victoria by Killian, always lingered in our Dallas home. A floral sweetness that once promised security, now just a ghost in the corners of my memory. I was Richard Sterling, a name that, for 50 years, had been synonymous with integrity in this city. A judge, a man of principle. My life, my very identity, was built on that foundation, a carefully constructed edifice of public trust and quiet devotion. I believed in fairness, in justice, in the unwavering moral compass I carried within me. And for so long, I believed Victoria, my elegant, vivacious wife, and Arthur, my steadfast golf buddy and business associate, believed in it too. They were my anchors, my fiercest advocates, or so I thought. The higher judicial office, the one I was contemplating running for, felt like the natural progression. A culmination of decades of diligent service, late nights poring over briefs, the weight of judgment always resting heavy but honorably on my shoulders. I saw it as a chance to expand my reach, to serve the community I loved on an even grander scale. Victoria, I imagined, would revel in the increased visibility, the societal recognition she always seemed to crave. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, would no doubt be thrilled by the potential business connections. My path felt clear, illuminated by a hopeful future, my heart full of purpose and, dare I say, a naive contentment. The only fear I had was of not living up to the immense responsibility, never of being utterly and maliciously undone by the two people closest to me. Our story began simply enough, a whirl of autumn leaves and shared laughter at a charity gala downtown. Victoria, radiant in a sapphire gown, moved with an almost ethereal grace. She was witty, charming, and possessed an innate understanding of the social dance I often found tedious. I, the earnest, somewhat reserved lawyer, was captivated. She spoke of shared values, of supporting each other's aspirations, of building a life rooted in stability and mutual respect. I saw in her a partner, a beacon of elegance to complement my own quiet ambition. Our courtship was a blur of expensive dinners and thoughtful conversations, culminating in a wedding that felt like the merging of two perfectly aligned destinies. Looking back, the early red flags were less scarlet, more a muted rose, easily dismissed as quirks of a vibrant personality. Her occasional sharp comment about the tediousness of my legal texts, quickly followed by an apologetic kiss and a declaration of how proud she was of my dedication. Her subtle preference for grander gestures, more lavish gifts, which I attributed to her refined taste, never to a deeper, unfulfilled desire. There was an incident, years ago, when I'd wanted to invest in a modest, ethically driven startup, and she'd steered me aggressively towards a more glamorous, riskier venture, one that ultimately failed, costing us a significant sum. Her explanation then was always that she wanted the best for us, a life of freedom, unburdened by financial worries. I believed her naturally. Her discontent seemed so far-fetched to me. A man who found profound satisfaction in his work and in our seemingly harmonious life. Arthur was different. Our friendship was built on the greens of the Dallas Country Club, cemented over scotch and strategic business discussions. He'd always been a confidant, a sounding board for my legal dilemmas, a man whose advice I trusted implicitly. He'd known Victoria longer than I had, in a social sense, and had always praised our union, often remarking how perfectly suited we were. He was family, in all but name. The idea that either of them could harbor anything but genuine affection and respect for me was simply beyond the scope of my understanding. The foundation of my existence, it seemed, was built on an elaborate, carefully constructed lie, and I, the judge, had been too blind to see it. The first whispers of discord began subtly, like a shift in the wind that you only notice when the leaves start to rustle differently. Victoria grew more distant, her presence in the evenings often replaced by an endless cycle of charity events or girls' nights. My calls would go unanswered for hours, a brief text arriving later, always apologetic, always with a plausible explanation. I tried to bridge the gap, suggesting weekends away, quiet dinners, but she'd deflect, a weary sigh escaping her lips. Asterisk Richard, you're so focused on your cases. Don't you think I have my own life? Asterisk her tone would be gentle, almost sad, making me feel selfish, insensitive to her needs. I try harder, convinced I was the one falling short. Then came the peculiar incidents. A crucial file, detailing a complex ethical dilemma from an old case, went missing from my home office, only to mysteriously reappear days later, slightly out of order. Important emails seemed to vanish from my inbox. I'd shrug it off as a symptom of my age, a lapse in memory, perhaps too many late nights. "You're stressed, darling," Victoria would say, her hand cool on my forehead. Asterisk, you need to relax. Maybe take a break from work. Asterisk, she'd suggest a vacation she knew I couldn't possibly take given my workload, further emphasizing my perceived failing. Arthur, too, began to subtly weave these threads of doubt. Over a round of golf, he'd casually mention an old acquaintance asking about my temperament lately, or a vague rumor circulating about a minor procedural error from a decade ago. He'd wave it off with a chuckle. Asterisk, just water cooler talk, old boy. But you know how these things stick to a public figure. Asterisk, he'd always frame it as concern, a warning from a friend, and I, ever the trusting fool, appreciated his vigilance. My mind, usually sharp and discerning, started to feel fuzzy, constantly second-guessing itself. I found myself checking and rechecking documents, rereading emails multiple times, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The ground beneath me, once so solid, had begun to imperceptibly shift, and I was too preoccupied with maintaining my balance to notice the slow erosion. The true destabilization began when the misconduct started to manifest in ways that couldn't be easily dismissed as my own absent-mindedness. An anonymous complaint reached the Judicial Ethics Committee, alleging minor financial irregularities in my campaign fund for the higher office, things like questionable dinner receipts and undeclared gifts from minor donors. It was vague, unsubstantiated, but enough to trigger an inquiry. My first reaction was shock, then anger. Who would do this? I had meticulously accounted for every cent. Victoria was outraged, feigning indignation on my behalf. Asterisk, this is an attack, Richard. They're trying to smear your good name. Asterisk, she cried, her eyes flashing with a fury that seemed genuine. Arthur expressed his sympathy, suggesting it was probably a jealous rival, offering his network to help sniff out the culprit. But then, things escalated. My campaign manager received a tip about an alleged private meeting I had with a defendant's family, a clear violation of judicial ethics. This one shook me to my core. I had never, not once, taken a meeting outside of court. I vehemently denied it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Victoria comforted me, but her words started to twist. Asterisk, you're so busy, darling. Are you absolutely certain you didn't just forget? Perhaps a quick coffee, a handshake that someone misinterpreted? Asterisk, her voice was soft, laced with concern, yet it dug at my confidence, making me question my own memory, my own sanity. I found myself staring at my reflection, seeing a man haunted by a narrative that wasn't his, yet seemed to cling to him like a shroud. I was losing my grip on reality, my steadfast integrity suddenly feeling like a fragile thing. The fear, cold and insidious, began to coil around my heart. The climax of this insidious campaign arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a phone connecting. The fabricated scandal, a slow burn of insinuation and anonymous tips, had finally begun to gain traction in the local Dallas papers. A few tentative articles, carefully worded but still damaging, had appeared, hinting at a judge under a cloud, a reputation unraveling. The whispers in the courthouse were no longer just whispers. They were hushed conversations, averted gazes. My sleep was non-existent. My appetite vanished. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, watching it crumble around me. One Tuesday night, unable to find rest, I was pacing our study, the heavy oak door slightly ajar. Victoria was supposedly out with friends, but her car was in the driveway. A strange prickle of unease had been gnawing at me for days, a desperate, irrational urge to find an explanation for the nightmare I was living. I heard voices, muffled at first, coming from the sunroom, a part of the house she rarely used late at night. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I moved silently, drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain. I stopped just outside the sunroom door, the wood cool against my trembling hand. A phone was on speaker, Victoria's voice, light and almost gleeful, echoing in the quiet room. And then, Arthur's familiar baritone. The morning edition will carry the front page exclusive, Arthur was saying, his voice thick with a self-satisfied chuckle. Our righteous judge won't know what hit him. The public will demand his head on a platter. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My stomach dropped, a sickening lurch. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing, every nerve ending alive with a dreadful premonition. Victoria's response was chilling. Perfect. The timing is crucial. We need to hit him with the final damaging reveal right when he's at his lowest, when his defenses are completely down. That's when I'll file. He'll be too broken to fight it. Here was no hesitation in her voice, no tremor of regret. Only a crisp, calculating clarity. She laughed, a sound that twisted my gut. Oh, Arthur, to finally be free. No more late nights alone. No more pretending to care about his tedious legal ethics. A life on my own terms, funded generously, thanks to his blind ambition. My vision blurred. I leaned heavily against the wall, my knees threatening to give out. My wife. My elegant Victoria. This couldn't be happening. Then Arthur spoke again, his voice laced with a venom I'd never imagined. And to think, he always thought he was so above it all. So principled. To watch him fall from that pedestal. It's been worth every moment of waiting. He took that senior partnership from me, Richard Sterling. Remember that? 20 years ago. He thought I'd forgotten. But a man never forgets when another man steals his due. This is more than a divorce settlement, Victoria. This is taking down the righteous judge. He savored the words, a low, guttural pleasure in his tone. The blood drained from my face, leaving me lightheaded, my ears ringing. My trusted friend, Arthur. His decades-long envy, a festering wound I had never known existed. And Victoria, her betrayal so complete, so utterly devoid of remorse. My mind struggled to process, to make sense of the monstrous reality. The incidents, the misunderstandings, the lost files, it all clicked into place with horrifying precision. They hadn't been accidents. They had been meticulously planned, each step a deliberate chisel aimed at the foundation of my life. I stumbled into the sunroom, my body stiff with shock, my face undoubtedly pale and contorted. They both jumped, turning sharply. The phone, still connected, lay on the small side table. Arthur's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Victoria's eyes, usually so warm and inviting, narrowed, a cold, hard glint in their depths. You too. I managed to choke out, my voice raw and unfamiliar. You monsters. Victoria didn't flinch. Her composure was chilling. She picked up the phone, disconnected the call with a click, and placed it back down with unnerving calm. Her gaze met mine, unwavering. You were too focused on your career, Richard, she said, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth. You never saw me, never heard me. I was unhappy. I wanted out, and you wouldn't give it to me. This was the only way. There was no apology, no remorse, only a cold, stark declaration of intent. It was as if I was a nuisance, an obstacle she had merely decided to remove. Arthur, recovering his composure, simply smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. Some scores just take longer to settle. Richard, he said, his eyes glinting with a triumphant malice. Consider us even. My world didn't just collapse in that moment. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. A wave of nausea swept over me, and I clutched at the nearest armchair, my knuckles white. My knees buckled, and I sank into the cushions, my mind reeling, unable to comprehend the enormity of what I had just heard, what I had just seen. The woman I had loved, the man I had trusted implicitly, had meticulously conspired to destroy me. Not just my career, but my very name, my integrity, the core of who I was. The next few days were a blur of unimaginable pain. I locked myself in my study, the sunroom confrontation playing on a loop in my head. Food was tasteless, sleep impossible. My body felt heavy, sluggish, yet simultaneously buzzing with a terrifying electrical current of shock and disbelief. My chest ached, a hollow, echoing void where my heart used to be. I kept touching my face, my hands, as if to confirm my own existence, to make sure I wasn't just a figment of some cruel nightmare. The reputation I had spent a lifetime building was crumbling, not from my own failings, but from the deliberate, calculating malice of those I held dearest. Each newspaper headline, each speculative article was a fresh stab, but the deepest wounds were the ones Victoria and Arthur had inflicted in that sunroom. My initial reaction was a desperate, paralyzing grief, an emotional collapse that left me feeling utterly hollowed out. I simply couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. It was as if my entire life had been a carefully crafted illusion, and I, the judge, the man of sharp intellect, had been the most foolish of all. I had prided myself on my judgment of character, on my ability to see through deception. How could I have been so blind, so utterly, fundamentally wrong about the people I loved most? But then, slowly, agonizingly, something began to shift within me. A spark, tiny at first, then growing into a flickering flame of something else entirely, anger. Not the impotent rage of a victim, but a cold, resolute fury. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was an assault on everything I stood for. My integrity, my name, my honor. I had allowed them to nearly obliterate it, to define my downfall. But I wouldn't let them have the final word. The awakening was like a brutal slap to the face, a splash of ice water that cut through the fog of despair. The Richard Sterling they wanted to destroy, the principled, naive, trusting judge, was indeed broken. But from the ashes of that destruction, something new, something fiercer, was beginning to emerge. I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to let them win their malicious game. I would fight. My first step was the hardest, the most painful incision into the life I had known. I announced my resignation from the bench, not because I was guilty, but because I refused to let their fabricated scandal tarnish the institution I revered. I stepped down, not with shame, but with a quiet, defiant dignity. I would face the public, but I would do it on my own terms, not as a disgraced judge caught in a web of his own making, but as a man wronged, a man who refused to be defined by their lies. The public announcement was terse, citing personal reasons and the need to focus on defending my good name. It bought me time, a small victory in a war that felt utterly overwhelming. Then came the second, equally agonizing step, initiating the divorce. It wasn't just a separation, it was a declaration of war. A very public, very contentious battle. My attorneys, initially skeptical, became fiercely loyal once I laid out the evidence. Once they heard the recording I had, by some stroke of providence, managed to capture from that horrifying night in the sunroom. The one I had, in my dazed state, remembered to secure. It became my shield, my sword. The ensuing months were a grueling, soul-crushing ordeal. The media frenzy was relentless, a voracious beast feasting on every salacious detail. My name, once whispered with respect, was now splattered across tabloids, dissected by talking heads. Victoria, with her carefully crafted innocence, played the wronged wife to perfection, but my lawyers meticulously picked apart her story, exposing the inconsistencies, the subtle manipulations. Arthur, too, found himself entangled, his own reputation slowly eroding under the relentless glare of scrutiny, the weight of his envy exposed for all to see. It was a battle fought in courtrooms and in the court of public opinion. I lost a great deal, the career I loved, a significant portion of my financial stability in the early stages of the divorce settlement, and a public image that was shattered beyond repair. The emotional scars ran deep, twisting through my very core, a constant ache of betrayal. There were days I wanted to give up, to simply retreat from the world and lick my wounds in solitude. But each time, the image of Victoria's cold, unrepentant face, Arthur's triumphant smirk, would fuel a renewed resolve. I had to fight, not for revenge, but for the truth, for the preservation of what little dignity I had left. I had to clear my name, not just for myself, but for the ideals I had served. Through the relentless grind of public accusations and legal battles, a new Richard Sterling began to emerge. The man who had been naive, trusting to a fault, was gone, replaced by someone forged in the crucible of profound betrayal. I learned to navigate the treacherous waters of public scrutiny, to differentiate between genuine concern and opportunistic gossip. I learned to trust my instincts again, but with a cautious, wary eye. The fierce inner strength I gained was not born of bitterness, but of resilience, of a refusal to be defined by someone else's malice. I won the divorce, not just on financial terms, but on moral ones. The truth, ugly and painful, eventually came out. Victoria was exposed for the manipulative, avaricious woman she was, her public image irrevocably tarnished. Arthur, his long-standing grudge laid bare, faced legal repercussions and the scorn of a community that had once held him in high regard. The public apology I received from various media outlets felt hollow, a small balm on gaping wounds, but it was enough to reaffirm that justice, even if painfully slow and imperfect, could still prevail. My life as a judge was over, irrevocably so, but the experience, the bitter lessons learned, sparked a new purpose within me. I became a legal ethics consultant, a quiet voice in a profession that desperately needed unwavering integrity. I now mentor young lawyers, guiding them through the moral complexities of their careers, sharing my story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a cautionary one, a testament to the insidious nature of betrayal and the vital importance of holding fast to one's principles. I speak of the unseen dangers, the subtle manipulations, the red flags that are so easy to dismiss in the glow of ambition and trust. My office, unlike the grand chambers of the courthouse, is modest, filled with books on philosophy and ethics, and photographs of peaceful landscapes, not legal dignitaries. There is no scent of Killian perfume here, only the clean, crisp smell of fresh coffee and old paper. The silence is not lonely. It is a companion, a space for reflection and quiet purpose. The pain of that betrayal will always be a part of me, a deep scar that reminds me of the darkness that can lurk beneath the most polished surfaces. It's a bittersweet kind of healing. I lost everything I thought I wanted, everything I thought I had. But in losing it all, I found myself again, stronger, wiser, and with a clarity of purpose that transcends any public office. I am still Richard Sterling, a man of integrity. But now, I am a man who truly understands the cost of that integrity and the fierce strength it takes to protect it. My new life is not the one I envisioned, but it is real, it is honest, and it is, finally, truly my own.